Thank you all for joining us today for this workshop on navigating the scholarly publishing landscape in 2026. We're very excited to welcome our speakers. We will introduce them before their presentations. And just some housekeeping before we get started. This is a Zoom meeting, so we do ask to please keep yourselves muted and your cameras off. Unless you are presenting. If you have any questions, please do include them in the Q&A, and we will either attend to them or address them online in the open session. We did ask registrants to vote for some questions to answer in the open session, and the topics that you all voted for, or the ones that got the most votes at least, was how to choose a journal and how to respond to reviewers' comments. So we will be including those two things or those two topics in the open session, and then any other topics you might have brought with you today. There should be enough time to cover those as well. So without further ado, we are going to start off the first presentation, and this is by my colleagues, Pumlani and Nadia, and we all work at the Academy of Science of South Africa for the South African Journal of Science. And we thought maybe we should start off with a quick fire A to Z of scholarly publishing terms that you might have come across and not been entirely familiar with, or not known actually what they do mean. So we're going to do a very quick fire A to Z. Just to give you a brief introduction to these terms. If there's any questions you want to ask about them, please pop them in the chat. But it is just a very brief description to familiarize yourselves with terms you may have come across. So starting with A, and a very important one, is the abstract. And this is the summary of your paper. It's very important because it's the most read part of a paper, and it's also included in various indexes, and it's therefore important for discoverability of your research. It's important when submitting an abstract or your paper with an abstract to a journal that you check the word limits of that journal. And you should write it last and make sure that it is a true reflection of the paper. If you write it first, sometimes you write what you think your paper is about and not actually what your paper is about. And there are various general types of abstracts: unstructured, that looks a bit like this; structured, where background, methods, results, and conclusions are separate; and even graphical abstracts in picture or image format. AI, well, that's a big one in 2026. I think most journals will have policies for AI use and disclosure, so please check those when submitting a paper. Altmetrics, or alternative metrics, are non-traditional indicators used to measure the broader reach of a journal article, such as social media mentions, news coverage, and Mendeley saves. Alt text, or alternative text, is a description added to an image or embedded in an article and read by screen readers to aid accessibility for visually impaired users. APCs, or article processing charges, is a fee charged by journals or publishers to cover the cost of publication of an article, and usually that's for open access articles. Authorship, Dr. Madupe is going to explain a bit of co-authorship in her presentation, but it's very important upfront to discuss and decide on authorship and the order of authorship of an article early in your study, and include only those and everybody who should be included who meets the criteria for authorship. Authorship contributions, these are declarations that you include in your journal article. They detail exactly what each author contributed toward that article, and this is for transparency and accountability purposes. Credit is an example of a standardized authorship contribution statement. It stands for Contributor Role Taxonomy. It has 14 credit contributor roles. And these are the contributions typically made to research outputs. And it is something that has been licensed for reuse, so other publishers can adopt it. Bibliometrics is a quantitative study of publications and their patterns of citation, authorship, and distribution. It is equivalent to creating data from literature, something that can then be counted, compared, and tracked over time. It is very discipline specific, and trends do vary across disciplines. There are different bibliometric indicators, journal level ones, article level ones, and author level bibliometrics. Site score is a Scopus specific metric, and it is the number of citations in a 4-year period divided by the number of articles indexed in the same period. Confidentiality, it's important to know that submitted manuscripts should be treated as confidential by editors and reviewers whilst they are under review. Conflict of interest is a personal, financial, or professional relationship or interest that could be perceived to unduly influence one's objectivity. Authors, reviewers, and editors could have potential conflicts of interest, and these should be disclosed before submitting or before peer reviewing. Copyright is the legal right that governs who owns, distributes, and modifies an academic work. Authors usually either transfer their copyright to a publisher or grant a license to that publisher to publish their work. Corrections and crossmark. Crossmark is a tool indicated by a logo shown in the picture, and it's included on an article and provides a status update on that article. If there is a correction or a retraction, it will be indicated by clicking on that logo. Articles can only be corrected post-publication through publication of a correction. One cannot change an original article once it has been published. The corresponding author is the primary point of contact between the authors and the journal, and is responsible for managing the submission and peer review, and also any post-publication inquiries. Creative Commons is a license that allows copyright holders to retain the copyright to their work while giving the public permission to use those works under certain conditions. Some of those conditions include by attribution, share alike, and non-commercial purposes. Crossref is a not-for-profit membership organization that provides digital infrastructure to publishers, things like digital object identifiers, Crossmark, which we've just explained, similarity checks, and cited by functionality. A data availability statement is the section of a journal article that tells readers where and how the data supporting the findings in that paper can be accessed. Declarations are mandatory standardized statements included at the end of the manuscript to promote academic integrity and transparency. For example, conflict of interest statements, funding statements, and data availability statements. Desk rejection is an immediate rejection by a journal editor before peer review, usually because of scope mismatch or methodological flaws in the paper. Digital preservation is the active management of digital content to ensure it remains accessible, usable, and authentic in perpetuity. A dissemination plan is a strategy that you decide on early on in your study for sharing your research findings with specific audiences to ensure that your findings are understood, adopted, and utilized by those audiences. It details what is being shared, with who, how, and when. DOIs, or digital object identifiers, are persistent identifiers for online documents such as journal articles and data sets. They are normally an alphanumeric code. Duplicate submission or duplicate publication is when the same paper or the same manuscript is submitted or published in 2 different journals at the same time, and this is not allowed by any journals. An editorial board is the group of editors who manage the editorial functions of a journal, or members who advise the editors on the journal's scope and strategy. An embargo is a restriction on sharing a journal article. You can get media embargoes or open access embargoes. Ethical approval You should obtain ethical approval if needed before your study, and you should include the details of any ethical approval obtained, any informed consent that was needed, and any relevant permits that you needed in your manuscript. Expression of concern is a formal notice issued by a journal to alert readers that a published article may be unreliable or may contain errors and is under investigation. They can be temporary or permanent. These are just an example of how an expression of concern may look on an article. The FAIR principles are guidelines designed to optimize the findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reuse of research data. Figures. It's important when submitting figures with your paper to ensure that they are high resolution and that they are of a size that will be legible when they are reduced to fit within the journal specifications. Always check the journal's guidelines for figures. Formatting. Always format your manuscript, including your references, according to the journal's guidelines. Funding sources should always be acknowledged and also include the grant numbers and the funder's specific identifier if you have it available. GEO stands for Generative Engine Optimization, similar to search engine optimization or SEO that you may be familiar with. And this is structuring digital content so that AI platforms can cite it or access it. Ghost authorship is when someone is included as someone who should be an author, is not included. And gift authorship when someone who shouldn't be an author is included as an author. Guidelines, very important to read and follow any journal guidelines before submitting your paper and also while peer reviewing papers. It's going to have to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm learning. I'll be taking off from H to P. And hybrid journals are subscription journals that allow authors to make individual articles open access by paying an APC. An H index is a metric that measures both productivity and citation impacts of a researcher. For example, an H index of 10 means the researcher has 10 cited papers, at least 10 times each. Hallucinations are references generated by AI that appear real but do not really exist. An impact factor, the journal level metric indicating the average number of citations received by articles published in the journal over a specified period. Indexing is the inclusion of a journal in a recognized database to improve discoverability and visibility. For example, Scopus, Web of Science, and PubMed. And ISSN, which is an International Standard Serial Number, is an 8-digit identifier used to uniquely identify a journal or serial publication. Informed consent is a process whereby research participants voluntarily agree to take part in a study after receiving adequate information about it. Journal finder tools are online tools that help authors identify suitable journals for their manuscripts. For example, Elsevier Journal Finder, Nature Journal Suggester, and other example would be Trinker's Journal Finder and Jane, which is a journal or author name estimator. A JET, which is Journal Article Text Suite, is an XML standard used to structure and exchange journal article content electronically. Journal scope is a description of subjects, disciplines, and article types that a journal publishes. Keywords are words or phrases that describe the main topics of the manuscripts and improve discoverability in databases and search engines. And licenses are terms that specify how published content may be used, shared, or reused. For example, a Creative Commons licenses. A lay summary is a plain language summary of a research article written for non-specialist audiences. And legal deposits are copies of published material submitted to designated national libraries as required by South African law. Language editing is the correction of spelling and grammar and improvement of clarity and readability in a manuscript. Manuscript submission systems is an online platform used to submit, review, track, and manage manuscripts. For example, OJS, Scholar One, or Editorial Manager. Meta-analysis is a statistical method that combines the results of multiple studies to produce an overall finding. And mentorship is a guidance and support provided by experienced researchers or editors to help develop research publishing and peer reviewing skills. Non-exclusive license is an agreement allowing a publisher to publish a work while author retains copyright ownership. For example, the Creative Commons licenses again. Open science is an approach that promotes transparency and accessibility in research through practices such as open access, open data, and open peer review. We have a few different open access models. We have gold, which is an immediate open access, usually with an APC. Green, when author archives a version in a repository. Hybrid, the subscription journal with an optional open access route. Diamond, platinum, open access with no APCs for authors or readers. Bronze, which is free to read but no clear reuse license. Blue, when author may archive the post-print publisher version. And yellow, an author may archive the preprint version. White, where there's no self-archiving right for authors. And black, which is illegally shared copyrighted content. Overlay journals are journals that review and publish articles already available on preprint servers. Persistent identifiers, PIDs, are permanent digital identifiers used to uniquely identify people, organizations, publication, and other research outputs. For example, ORCID IDs, DOI, and ROR. Plagiarism is presenting another person's words, ideas, or work as one's own without proper acknowledgement. Predatory publishing are publishing practices that prioritize profit over scholarly standards and lack proper peer review and editorial oversight. Policies are formal general rules governing areas such as authorship, ethics, data sharing, AI use, and peer review. Permissions are authorization required to reuse copyrighted materials such as figures, tables, or images. Peer review models, we have a single anonymous where the reviewer knows the authors and authors do not know the reviewers. A double anonymous where the authors and reviewers are anonymous to each other. A triple anonymous where the authors, reviewers, and the editors are anonymous. And an open review. Identities and/or reports are disclosed. Preprints are versions of manuscripts shared publicly on preprint servers without formal peer review, which can subsequently be submitted to a journal for publication. Thank you.
Okay. Just want to switch on my camera and then we'll proceed with Q. So here we have quality assurance and peer review. So these are processes that ensure that peer review is consistent, fair, and of high quality through editorial oversight and reviewer guidance. For example, the selection of appropriate reviewers, having clear guidelines for reviewers, ensuring reviews are thorough, constructive, and unbiased, and identifying plagiarism, ethical issues, and conflicts of interest. Quartile ranking. This is a metric-based ranking system used by databases such as Scopus and Web of Science to group journals into quartile 1 to quartile 4 within the various subject categories based on its citation impact. Retractions. This is the formal removal of a published article due to ethical issues or errors. Reproducibility is the ability for research results to be repeated by others using the same methods and data, enabled through clear methods, shared data or code, and transparent reporting. Reference managers. These are tools used to store, organize, and format references in scholarly writing, for example, Zotero, EndNote, and Mendeley. Review articles. These are articles that don't present new experiments, but instead collect and summarize what is already known from many studies. There are scoping reviews. These give a broad overview of all research on a topic, showing what has been studied and where the gaps are. And then systematic reviews follow strict step-by-step methods, such as the PRISMA guidelines, to carefully gather and evaluate all studies on a specific question to find the most reliable overall answer. Reviewer fatigue. This is when reviewers become overburdened and less able to accept review requests due to frequent invitations or workload. Reviewer profiles. These are online records showing a reviewer's expertise, affiliations, and review activity, for example, through platforms such as Upvoted, Web of Science, and reviewer credits. Repositories. These are online platforms that provide trusted long-term storage and access to research outputs. Examples include Archive for preprints, Zenodo for research outputs and data sets, and institutional repositories. These host theses and publications for a specific institution. Research Organization Registry is a registry that provides open, persistent identifiers for research organizations. It helps people and systems accurately identify and distinguish research organizations, enabling reliable links between institutions, researchers, and their research outputs. Submission. This is the process of sending a manuscript to a journal for consideration. Self-archiving is when authors upload a version of their own work to an online repository to increase access. Publishers often allow this, but may set conditions such as embargo periods or restrictions on which version, accepted or published article, can be shared. Policies can be checked using tools such as the JISC Open Policy Finder. Self-plagiarism, also called text recycling, is when authors reuse part of their own previously published work in a new manuscript without clearly citing or disclosing that the material has appeared before. Salami slicing is the unnecessary splitting of one study, data set, or argument into multiple publications instead of one paper, often driven by publication pressure, and it can lead to duplication, confusion, and ethical concerns. Supplementary material is additional supporting content not included in the main article. Similarity checking is software used to detect text overlap with existing publications via Authenticate and Turnitin as an example. Turnaround times is time taken for a manuscript to move through the various stages of submission, peer review, acceptance, and publication. Title pages, these include general details about a manuscript and its authors and provide information such as the article title, author information, declarations, and funding or support sources. Transfer cascade is a process whereby a manuscript is rejected by one journal but is automatically or editorially transferred to another journal within the same publisher or other publisher. This may include carrying over submission and peer review information to speed up the review process. Text and data mining is the automated process of extracting and analyzing large volumes of text or data to identify patterns, relationships, and meanings. It is used to support research by enabling large-scale searching, pattern detection, and understanding how information connects to concepts and research needs. Unpaywalled is content freely accessible without payment or subscription barriers. Updates is post-publication changes such as corrections or additions that can be identified through example, Crossmark. Usage metrics, these measure how often research outputs are viewed, downloaded, cited, and shared. Version of record is the final official published version of an article. Vanity journal is journals that focus on accepting papers quickly, often for money, rather than ensuring rigorous peer review and strong scientific quality. A waiver is a reduction or a full removal of publication fees, such as submission article processing charges granted to authors who meet certain conditions, often to support equitable access to publishing. Withdrawal is the removal of a manuscript from the publication process by the authors, or in some cases, the journal before it is formally published. And then lastly, we have XML, extensible markup language, the structured digital format used to organize and share information about a scholarly article, such as title, authors, abstract references, and DOI between systems. And then this is just a reminder of your own responsibility in ensuring compliance with author guidelines, ethical standards, best practices, and principles of transparency and integrity. And then just the Z-score is a common statistical measure that shows you whether something is above or below average and by how much compared to the normal spread of values. And that is it for the A to Z part of the presentation.
Thank you, Nadia and Pumlani. So hopefully you learned something. I know we actually learned a few things while we were creating the A to Z. So it was a very quick fire, hopefully not too quick, but hopefully something that you didn't understand before is now more understandable. So our next presenter is Dr. Palesa Madupe. She is from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. She's a postdoc there, and she has a BSc from the University of the Witwatersrand and an MSc from the University of Pretoria, and she got her PhD from the University of Copenhagen. Her research investigates ancient biomolecules from Pleistocene hominins in Africa to address questions that cannot be easily resolved with morphological or genomic data alone. The African hominin fossil record from the late Pliocene to middle Pleistocene is exceptionally diverse, but the scarcity of molecular evidence has hampered efforts to clarify the evolutionary relationships among the extinct taxa. Because ancient DNA rarely survives over large timescales, Dr. Madupe employs paleoproteomic techniques using the ancient proteins to reconstruct the phylogeny, to study the interspecies variation, and to assess the sexual dimorphism in these fossils. She is also the first author of the article that was the outstanding article for the SHAS outstanding article for 2025. And she's going to be telling us or sharing with us all about authoring a co-authored article. So thank you, Dr. Madupe, and we look forward to learning more about that. You just want to unmute. It's like flying a plane, all the things you have to think of.
My gosh, I'm so sorry. So sorry everyone about that. I could not find the one of the tabs, but yeah, now we're here. So let me start off by thanking the South African Journal of Science and other stakeholders who organized this workshop and inviting me to give a talk about how to author a co-authored article. Disclaimer, I've never given a talk like this before. I mostly give talks around my work and lectures on the research in my field. So this is going to be a little bit choppy in some parts, but I hope some of the points that I do mention are kind of helpful. If you don't find them helpful, that is okay. There's a lot of literature on how to author articles. So the reason why I chose this title and talking about how to author an article that is you're showing co-authorship, it's because I realized that when putting together many of my all of my publications, actually, that the process becomes easier and very foundational if you include a couple of your co-authors in the planning stage of your publication. So this is what I'm going to focus on, and I hope this is helpful to some people. Yeah. So this is the structure of this talk. We're going to be talking. I'll talk about how to gather yourself in your thoughts and how to work backwards from your results. And the main crux, like I said, of this talk will be planning with your co-authors how to do that. And then the last bit of the presentation will be on how to incorporate the plan in your final structure for your publication. So if you're at the point where you're ready to write a publication, you're ready to communicate to the world about the work that you did, this is a huge achievement in itself. Congratulations. Not a lot of research gets to this point. So congratulations to you and your co-authors. With that said, one thing that helps me with putting together publications is by framing the process of writing, especially the initial part of the planning, as intentional and strategic, not just writing, but at the back of my mind, I'm always thinking that I am storytelling using data. And before you get to the point where you're storytelling, probably your results exist in multiple forms in different locations. The first thing that you need to do is gather everything in one folder or a document or whatever works for you. Gather everything into one. This is going to be helpful once you have a meeting for the planning of your paper. And I'll give you an example. With the paper that won the award for last year, I had one of my processes is every time I start a project, I'll create obviously a folder, but I will also present prepare a PowerPoint presentation, and I keep everything in that one document. Every time I do an experiment, every time I get a new data point, I'll put it in the presentation. And at some point for this project, the presentation, the slide, presentation had like 447 slides to it. So every time I had to give an update to different people in the project or group meetings, this is the presentation I would use. So this was very helpful for me to get into the structuring and planning for the publication. So before we get into planning with your co-authors, the main thing is working back from the results. And this part, so I have 2 slides where I actually consulted actual experts on how to write a paper. And these are the 3 papers that I'm going to be summarizing in the next 2 slides. And this is because I needed something that is like actual data and people who have thought about writing, people who think about this a lot, and share that as like a foundation on what the presentation is going to look like. So what they say is that one of the biggest thing is like the rule of 1, focus the entire paper on a central theme. And this is how you do so is by asking yourself, what is the central insight? Why does this matter? Think about that when you're thinking about structuring your paper, because this is how you're going to write the paper, number 1, but also this is the message that you want to communicate to people who are going to be reading your paper. And the first thing that you do is outline your results. And I will detail how to do this in the next slide. And with detailing your outlining your results, it helps with you it helps with formulating a logical flow to the work that you did. And this is way much better than doing like a chronology of how you did the work. Because with chronology, it's very long and extensive, and you'll soon realize with like when you write in a chronological way, there's parts of the chronology that does not make sense to the story. Some of your failures, you don't want to share that, so it doesn't make sense to write in a chronological way, but rather based on the results, write in a logical flow. I am always tempted to write in a chronological way, but every time I stop and like, this does not make sense. Let me look at the figures and see what's the theme that emerges. And this is important to write in a logical flow rather than chronology, because you're writing to an audience. You have to think about how they are going to receive and understand your work. So how to think about structuring your results is maybe in a document somewhere. You can do a visualize the flow. So taking your figures, all of your figures and all of your supporting data, and doing like a storyboard of some sort. So you'll take your figures and write like a 1 or 2 sentence as to what the figure says. If there's a table, what the table communicates, 1 or 2 sentences, don't take it beyond that. This becomes very important because this helps with like I said, the logic of the paper. And also this is how you will see the central theme of the paper. And also this helps with when you're ready to structure your discussion and conclusion. It helps with ensuring the flow, the interpretation of the results, and thus the narrative that you are eventually going to be communicating to the people. So this is like the gist of all of those papers. Focus on your results, start there, and also do like a storyboard to actually see your what the story is. You're going to be putting things here and then see how that flows, and this is going to be helpful for your discussion and conclusion. So now that is like the introduction, let's go into how you plan with your co-authors. The main question that you're probably thinking, I have a lot of people that I'm collaborating on a specific project. How do I choose? I have this example here that there is the lead there and other 5 co-authors. Altogether, it's 6 authors there. All of them have different specialities and different roles that they play into the project. This is an ideal scenario. Most of the time, it doesn't look like this, but in this perfect scenario, the collaboration looks like this. How you decide is basing this decision on skills complementary. You're thinking about how to which of these people complement the skills that you have and who will help shape the narrative. So this is probably going to be senior authors, people that are in the field that you're in, people who have written a lot. These are the people that you could potentially ask. And also one of the biggest one is the people that you eventually ask to help with this process are going to be taking time from their schedule. And so that means that you have to think about that as well. Are they available to actually help me with this process? In this case, this person potentially could ask their supervisor and potentially author number 5, because they're aiming to maybe put this work that they did in a psychology or psychiatry journal. So continue with this example. The first thing is to try and meet the people that you're asking in person. This is essential. Unless if you can't, obviously if you can't, it has to be over Zoom, but it's also acceptable. If you can meet in person, please do so. That worked. That's what I did. And the other thing is to realize that the planning process, it could take a couple of days, maybe if you're lucky, a day. If you're not, probably 2, 3 more days. So the first thing after setting the meeting is showing your results storyboard, essentially, what you're saying. Like, these are the figures, these are the tables, and each of them say this. This becomes very important because you're taking their time, and it's much easier for people to get into the groove of discussion and contributing to your work in a discussion form if you're priming them to what your results say. So it becomes like very easy, and people generally want to help once you have given like a nice little presentation. It's like, okay, how do we do this? This is helpful. And then from this, I would suggest that have discuss what the main theme of the paper is. And in the work that I have done, we have landed between the main theme is described and explained by between 3 to 5 figures. These are the figures that are essential to the story. So essentially think about it in this way. If the figure were to be removed, would the story collapse? If yes, then that means that is a critical figure for your main theme. This also is translatable to tables as well and other forms of results as well. And yeah, so this is like the things that you're going to be discussing with your 2, 3, however many people that you want to help with the planning process. So just to give you an example, I'm going to use the publication that won the award. In this paper, the people that I planned with was Enrico Capellini and Rebecca Ackerman. This was easy for me to ask because these were my main advisors. So it was they were more inclined, and I had worked with them on many projects. So we had like I guess like a flow and routine and like a familiarity on how to work together. And in this paper, the main theme is literally communicated in the title. We were looking at the dental proteome of Australopithecus africanus, and we wanted to use that data to confirm the potential of a technique called phytoproteomics that can be used in Pleistocene fossils from South Africa. So Pliocene to Pleistocene fossils in South Africa. So the first figure that we included, and we show that what the specimen looks like, this Africanus specimen looked like. This figure serves to communicate 2 things. One, to the general public, anybody that is reading this paper, so this is what the fossil looks like. The other one is communicating to curators and other paleoanthropologists that for this technique, you really do not need a pristine fossil, any type of fragment of a fossil that you have, so long as if it has a taxa ID that could be used in this analysis. And then the other figure serves 2 things, like, hey, once you have generated this information, you can answer questions around biological sex. And this is what this figure demonstrates. Like, we have strong evidence that this individual, this 63 individual, comes from a male individual. And then the last one is to put the data that we have in context to other studies that have looked at ancient proteins to say that where does this fossil lie, and where does it lie in relation to South African material and other material in the world, to show that fossils dated in that time age as this one can be analyzed using this technique as an example. And then the other thing that you can actually discuss beyond the main theme and main figures of the paper is the supplementary data and other things as well. So this is going to be additional context. So these are going to be supplementary figures and data. Here, these are going to be your controls, replicated data, raw stuff like that, raw files, and extended analysis. So these are add to the main story, but they do not, if they are not included in the paper, the story is still there, is still strong, it doesn't collapse the main theme of the paper. And then the other thing that you're going to be discussing as well in this meeting is suggesting the reviewers who are going to be reviewing your work. And most journals often ask for you to suggest the reviewers. Please discuss this with your chosen people, chosen co-authors, because this is very important. They are probably knowledgeable on this, and also it's much better to do it at the early stage rather than at the late stage of your writing process, because once you have that list of people who you want to review your work, it increases the chances, obviously, of a timely and relevant feedback. And how to think about this is around expertise and relevant expertise, and where geographically diverse people to review your work, and it should be around 3 to 5 names. One of the things that you should avoid when choosing referees is Obviously, no collaborators or recently published people that you've recently published with, no friends, former advisors, and moms and grandmothers. Unfortunately, that would be great if that was the case. And then some journals do allow you to have an exclusion list. If you do have a list of people or based on ethical, I guess, qualms that you're like, I don't want these people to be reviewing my work because of ethics, I think it's okay to have this, but it has to be something that makes sense as to not beyond that I'm so scared that this person is going to be harsh about my work, but ethical things. And then again, in this meeting, the other thing that you're going to be discussing, journals to send the paper, the scope of the work, where does it belong, where would it get more people reading, reading the paper, things like that. And then one other thing that I also suggest that you could possibly cover in these meetings is the cover letter. This is something that you write on behalf of you and your supervisor and your co-authors. Obviously, you contact the editor directly in a letter, and you will outline the significance and, most importantly, the relevance to the journal. You state like, we think that this paper belongs here, and this is why it belongs here. And then you will indicate conflicts of interest and then include the list of suggested reviewers. And in other cases, the ones that you do not want to be reviewing your work. The cover letter happens at a later stage, but you can start structuring it as you're writing. And then one other thing that you should definitely be discussing is an author list. Do this with the PI. If the person is your supervisor, please do this so that you know you're well aware who is going to be contributing to the paper. Some people probably contributed before you joined the project. So these are names that you have to know. So let's go through the pros and cons on on planning with your co-authors or some of your co-authors. One, diverse perspectives, that is always going to be an advantage. You get to see how people view and interact with your data. But the problem is the coordination that is going to require a lot of navigating, getting people in the same location, times, and all of those things, sharing documents that's going to require a lot out of you. And then the nice thing is like you're going to have shared workload in the planning process. You can even decide to say like, okay, this section I'm not familiar with. Can I ask this person to write that section, or I can write it? Can they review it? Things like that within the co-author list. But the problem with this part is that what the cons of planning is that there's a chance that you're going to be potential that you could lose your central message. But if you communicate and plan, this will not happen. It definitely increases rigor. However, it does move a little bit slow. It will definitely have a broad impact because you're going to be planning with people from diverse backgrounds. And unfortunately, there's going to be probably tensions over ideas. But this can be easily navigated. One of my favorite parts about doing this is that you definitely do learn to advocate for yourself and your ideas. You learn ways of better communicating your ideas and standing up for yourself, essentially. The con is that you're really going to get to know your co-authors in all of their wonderfulness. Yeah. And then once this is done, once you're done, you're planning with your co-authors, you're going to refine the final structure. Here, you're going to be excluding sections or figures that do not fit the final plan and add those that you have missed. Then create a draft, do a timeline for you and your co-authors. In this draft, you're going to be adding figures, main figures, supplementary data, maybe at the bottom, have sections to the paper that you've discussed with your co-authors that you were planning with. And then here you would even say the section is going to be reviewed by this person, or this person is going to be written by this person. And then, as this is like a loop back to the first few slides, the the suggestion is to write your results first, discussion, and conclusion. This helps with the narrative flow of the story, and then introduction and abstracts and methods. This you can write the way that you want. Obviously, this is not a you're forced to do this. Do what works for you. And obviously, you probably know this, that in each paper in each article, there is a section. This is divided by sections, and they have different paragraphs that serve for different purposes. And this is what that looks like. You can have a look at this in one of the papers that I mentioned. And then during this part as well, you will then start to format the document according to the journal that you chose, specifications, find a template. They have this online readily available. And my final advice around this is to have a writing routine. Chain yourself to the table and just write. And then share your drafts with the people that are going to be contributing to the work. And this is going to be an iterative feedback loop where you write stuff, they read and give you your feedback. Think about your other co-authors as people that are helping you refine, like your first level of reviewing. So they're helping shape the story, the narrative, and giving you points where you might have missed things and what you need to include. And if a message is it's not clear, stuff like that. And you will definitely have multiple drafts about when you're doing this process. And lastly, remember, no effort is wasted, especially in writing, because writing is a cognitively demanding thing that requires you to be constantly writing. Honestly, just write. Just sit down and write. And be kind to yourself, because this is not, especially for those of us who are not English native speakers, this is honestly a very demanding task. And remember that your co-authors want to see you succeed and the work to get published. So they are your allies in this regard. Hopefully they're nice people. And one last thing I'll say is, please save all of your drafts. You never know what's going to happen. I have class stuff and local stuff. That's all from me, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Palesa. That was really, really insightful advice. I think the last slide especially is very good advice for everyone to remember, and easy advice to remember. And yeah, I think you've shown just how important it is to plan and to communicate and to do that throughout the process, and how much value that can add, especially in a co-authored article. So thank you very much for that. We are a little bit over, and I know you need to leave to work on another paper. So I just want to ask is maybe if there's just one burning question anyone has before you go. Not seeing any hands up or any. So I think you were very clear and very specific, and certainly very good advice for anyone inexperienced and experienced to take on board in their writing and specifically planning their next paper. So thank you very much again for presenting.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks so much. Wonderful. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Professor Messias Alpheus. He is an associate professor of financial risk management in the Department of Statistics and Actuarial Science at Stellenbosch University. He holds a PhD from the University of Technology, Sydney, and serves as the lead principal investigator of the NIT's Quantitative Finance Research Program, and he's also the editor-in-chief mentee at the South African Journal of Science. And he sits on the editorial board of Journal of Futures Markets and International Journal of Theoretical and Applied Finance. His research focuses on the development of numerical methods and analytical solutions for complex option derivatives, with an emphasis on rigorous model design and evaluation. In addition to his academic roles, he contributes to industry practice as a specialist consultant to First Rank Group's Market Risk Technical Committee, supporting robust risk governance and model oversight. But today he's going to be telling us all about the accountable use of AI in journal articles. And I know this is one many of you have been asking about. So Messias, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Linda, for such a kind introduction. And today I want to talk to you something that is already happening in academic research and development. I know the use of AI tools in academic works. The question I'm interested in is not whether AI is being used, but actually the question I'm interested in is how we govern the use of AI in order to protect transparency, accountability, and also fairness. Like the title of my talk is already reflecting the shift of what I want really to discuss with you, the accountable use of AI in academic article or journal. And of course, I want also toward the end of this talk, I want also to practice what I'm preaching. I am going to have a disclosure statement in which I'm going to read to you at the end. So first of all, the agenda of my talk is why AI matters for scholarly publishing, especially in 2026, and what the South Africa Journal of Science have already put in place, especially with the policy, and how South Africa Journal of Science is doing well with regards to AI policy, and the useful AI tool support versus the red flag on which you shouldn't do, the risk that the editors and the authors have to manage, especially publications, confidentiality, biasness that the AI tool can create, as well as the inequality, especially when the global south and especially the African continent and universities, we have a lot of inequality there. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about how one can actually prompt the AI or prompting the AI, as well as how one can actually write a disclosure statement, and also practical authors workflows in order to make sure that, we use the AI tool very responsibly. And I'm also going to share finally the checklist that everyone that is using AI has to make sure that you just make sure that you go through all this before you submit your article to a journal. AI, of course, is growing so fast, and is reshaping how the researchers search articles, write code, or maybe revise their manuscript. And of course, the open access is also growing, becoming fast as a default, but access and affordability remain uneven. Especially, we have some university have over subscription to some journals, and some they don't have. So there's an uneven structures in. So submission volumes are also increasing fast. Together, especially the editors and the reviewers are becoming overwhelmed because of the manuscript submissions that are coming into their journals, and this is actually creating an alarming concern about research integrity and also the quality of the research. For many authors, especially early career researchers, this landscape of publishing is becoming very overwhelming and very complex. But what I want to bring it across to you today, especially the early career researchers and also higher degree research students, is that you shouldn't get panicked, but we should actually learn how to use AI responsibly. Okay, of course, the South African Journal of Science has already placed important policies of how to use the AI. Of course, I was given an opportunity to write a guest reader, and of course, together with the AI policy for the South African Journal of Science, there are permitted support use and also things that are not acceptable. Example, the permitted use of AI as like language editing, for instance, and editing a descriptive non-data image. So that means you are editing image that they don't have data and so on. Summarizing existing literature reviews and the literature, and that's acceptable. And also using limited support use, but of course you must have a disclosure how you have used the AI in your research. What is not acceptable is AI. You cannot use, you cannot say ChatGPT is an author to the paper. So the AI tool cannot be listed as an author. In generated manuscript, you cannot just put something into your AI tool and then submit it as you, and then you own that as your scholarly work. And also you can't, you are not allowed to upload confidential manuscript into large language models or during peer review. So that means you cannot even submit, even for referees, you cannot put a manuscript into a public platform. These are confidential. So, and also AI generated referee report is not allowed. So what are the core principles for the responsible use for the AI? And this I gathered some resources from Robert Pfaff, who also quite a big use of AI and generated AI, and also Hossein, who also published 2 papers actually in the Journal of South African Science in 2023 and 2024. And of course, you can also look at my editorial address, the current issue for the South African Journal of Science. And so what are the core principles of the use for the AI? And there are quite a lot, but I can just give you 3 of them. First of all, you have to fact check carefully. You have to make sure AI sometimes can sound very fluent. Everything looks so perfect, but still really wrong. Especially what we have here, we have hallucinated references, claims. Sometimes AI can bring something like a claim that sounds really okay, but of course it's not okay. Just make sure you fact check carefully and also be transparent. So this is the second point that I want to say. You should acknowledge in the acknowledgement section of your paper, you must really acknowledge the material use of AI and also what you have done and what AI has done. And also you have to make sure that you document your prompt, because sometimes the journal would want to have a transcript of your chat with your AI, of your conversation or your engagement with the AI. And of course, AI is a tool. You as an author or a researcher, you own the output. Make sure that whatever comes from the AI tool, you are able to stand, and you're also able to be confidently be able to explain to an editor or a reviewer. Please make sure that the judgment, the responsibility, and the final decision remain human responsible. So those are 3 core principles of the responsible use of AI. And of course, what the supportive use, of course, this is also very important. And I've also cited from Cardiff and Upvoted, who was, of course, published the core principle of use, the ethical use of AI. And also, you can also look at my editorial guest leader about how one can actually use the supportive use. What you can do, you brainstorm possible research angles or idea. Title, you frame all your framing options. You classify, you clarify the abstract structure, the section heading, also even supporting letter organs or response letter organization, how you want everything to be flowing. So how you want to improve the language, the readability after that. As an author, you have to make sure that you have done your part. You control, your AI tool is just to enable you to do your work as fast as possible. You suggesting the code, how you want your code set up to be like, and also how maybe you want to debug your code or the pathway and so on. Everything lies into your hand, but the AI is maybe just to framing your way you want your manuscript, and also help to plan how you're going to write a disclosure statement toward the end of your manuscript, and also be able also to record the prompt that you have used. Because like I said already, some journals, especially South African Journal of Science, we want to make sure that if you have disclosed that you have used AI, we also want probably to look at your prompt that you have used. And then oh, sorry, I just have to, yes. And then here, I think that is not tolerated in academic research. The responsible use of AI is not about, you can't submit a manuscript, which is AI generated text that you don't understand, that you cannot able even to explain yourself as a researcher or an author, and that you have not revised. Do not invest or trust references. I said this already, because AI can generate references that looks really right with everything, but it is actually wrong. But please make sure that you double check that before. Do not use AI to do all your intellectual work, or maybe some claims of ownership or scholarship that you have not engaged with properly. And do not also upload confidential manuscript into a public platform. And also do not let polished wording hide shallow thinking. Especially here, AI can make weak argument looks like some excellent idea. So make sure that you double check. You are in control as an author to make sure that you're also able to explain everything that your AI tool have produced. So these are the risks that journalists and the authors has to manage, especially in academics. So fabricated references, I said already, unverified claims. So those are the risks that editors has to currently manage. And then, of course, the authors, if you're writing your paper, make sure that you are in control of everything. Inaccurate summaries of literature reviews or methodology that you have considered. And of course, I also, in my presentation, I also put a lot of references here of things that are being currently discussed, especially now that this has become a running case. Bias against certain topic or regional writing style, because again, AI is trained on multiple data. Maybe the data that this AI was trained is biased on some certain topic. And again, over reliance on open access, because the AI is only able to train on articles that are open access and are freely available. And I said this already, the article or papers that are not open access, again, there's a problem because AI cannot able to find those. And again, there's a paper that was actually a commentary that was published by Wingfield and Wingfoot in the South African Journal of Science, and actually addressed this. And again, this references is also here, and you can go ahead and have a look at. So the whole idea again here is that AI only depends on open access, and then there are some actually extremely well references that are not open access, and that is actually a problem with the AI. So again, so equity, access, and also African context, and this is already said about this, that AI access is uneven across institutions because maybe of some subscriptions and countries and so on, because maybe because of financial or resources are available. And of course, this AI can also be very useful, especially for authors that are writing outside their first language, especially English is not a first language. That means that it can be very useful for language editorial. And also the literature most visible to AI, again, is the one that is freely available and so on. And this is again by Wingfield, and Wingfield that he said that, oh, actually, that's, that AI is only accessible to open access articles. And of course, policies, responsible policies should be adopted in order to protect integrity, accountability, as well as fairness, in order not to deepen the existing inequality. So example for some slide prompts that maybe I want to share with you, some prompts. So be specific on what you want to ask. Give a context, a field or audience or a journal or a part of section to an AI tool. And also state the role of who are you? Tell AI who I am I a co-author, am I a referee or a skeptic, reviewer, or maybe just a writing coach. Define how you want the output to be. Sometimes you want a structure of your output to be maybe a pitching research framework of Robert Pfaff. And maybe you must give a detailed prompt to AI. And of course, you must make sure that sometimes again, you need to keep engaging the AI tool, because the first response from the AI is not always the best response. So that means you must keep asking or conversating with the AI tool in order to get to get more a precise answer. So request critics, like maybe what is weak, what's missing, cross-check the important output, and also keep a record of all the materials for the prompts, because like I said, the disclosure might be needed at the end. So so the AI is actually a partnership, that it's a research partner or research assistant that you want. So in order to have a good partnership, it must have a bounded use. So you should make sure that you start with your own research question, draft the idea, and of course the use of AI must also be bounded. And so you must brainstorm structure, language, critics, and so on. Verify all the references. I said this already in my earlier. Make sure that you rewrite your own scholarly in your own scholarly voice. Make sure that you're able to defend every piece of your writing. And again, it's not submit the work that you can genuinely be able to stand or be able to prove, because if not, then actually it dismantle, or actually your reputation is an author if you are not honest about the use of AI. Okay, so again, these are some killer prompts that you can actually give to AI. Be specific, give the context, state the role of your who you are, and tell the task. Define the format of your work, and again, this is what. So ask the bullet point, a table, or maybe a short paragraph, the abstract structure or flow, the pitching research framework structure, or the critics. Be specific and also set some constraint. And this is the bounded use of AI, because sometimes over-reliance on AI can actually weaken your scholarly contribution. So as an author, please make sure. So these are some of the killer prompting tips that I would want to share with you. I'll give you an example of a prompt, and this is a prompt submitted to ChatGPT 4.0 on 17th of June 2026, and I give it. You are a language editor for an academic journal. Please improve the clarity, language, grammar, the flow of the following abstract. Do not change any technical term, data values, or substantive claims. Return only the revised abstract with no commentary. and then you paste your abstract there. So why is this a good prompt? Or what makes this a good prompt? The role is defined, your language editor, the task is bounded, the language only, no content change. The output format is also defined, that this is abstract only. The author has reviewed and revised the output before submission, and this is actually quite good. And then how the example of how to do the disclosure text, maybe in your acknowledgement, actually, you can do this. You say ChatGPT 4.0, OpenAI Access 17 June 2026 was used to assist with language editing of the abstract. The prompt instructed the tool to improve the clarity and the grammar only without altering technical content. The output was reviewed and revised by the authors who take responsibility of the final text. And again, this is a good, because the name of the tool version was clearly disclosed, the state of the data, we stated the date of the access, and also we described the nature of the scope of the use, and affirm that the human have reviewed, and the author's responsibility was also disclosed. And I'm also going to disclose, because I want to practice what I'm preaching. In preparing this presentation, I used ChatGPT to assist in drafting the background note. I used Cloud Code to generate and format the presentation slides. All final contents and framing reflect my own judgment and authorship. And again, I won't go into detail of this because I've already explained the name of the tool, the description of the description of the scope, the authors. I check everything, and the language claim, of course, I say this. Okay, before submitting your manuscript, these are final or pre-submit check that you must use. So you want to ask yourself, have I verified every reference and claim? Could I explain and defend the argument without a tool? Did I avoid uploading my confidential manuscript into a public platform? Have I checked the method, the code, the data suggestion independently? Is the writing now genuinely mine or not just polished by AI output? And did I keep proportionate notes of material prompt because this might be needed for a journal? Have I disclosed the use where the journal expects? And would I be comfortable explaining my process to an editor or a reviewer? And those are some of the checklists that you need to check for yourself. And finally, AI plus you as an author is greater than AI. So meaning if handled well, AI can support scholarship without reducing human responsibility. But if we handle badly, it can weaken the accountability and also deepen the inequality that's already existing. So I've left you with some questions that you need to ponder with yourself here. Where should the journal draw the lines? What should count as a material disclosure, and how do we protect integrity without making participation hard into this? And I think these are some of the things that we as editors and also authors, scholars, have to ask ourselves: where should we draw the line? How we can create a fine balance between this? And again, I put some references, and again, this is my guest leader in the current issues in the South Africa Journal of Science. And here is also a reference on academic use of artificial AI And this is also the ethics on disclosing your AI tool, and also here using AI in scholarship publication. And this is a paper, a commentary by Wingfield on hidden costs. This is the big picture here again, is say the inequality, the global south, and also articles that are not available open access. And also here is the Robert Pfaff presentation on responsible use of AI. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Messias. I think that was very comprehensive guidelines, and I think bounded use verification and disclosure is a good mantra for everyone to remember whenever thinking of using AI or writing their journal articles. So thank you for that, and I think your slides will certainly be a good reference for those listening to come back to when and if the time arises that they want to check before they use. Are there any questions for Messias? I don't think there's anything in there's a question in the Q&A. No, I think we've done that one, but I don't know if there's any hands raised for questions for Messias on accountable use of AI. I think you must have answered everyone's questions, because I know definitely people had questions in their heads. So I think you have been very clear.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes,
Yep.
Please go ahead.
Hi, it's Ashraf Kaji from Stellenbosch University. I very much appreciated the presentation. I think it can be a little bit complicated, though, about where the intellectual authority comes from when one uses AI. For example, I just typed into Claude, give me a radical critique of positive psychology, and it came up with a whole bunch of things for me. What if I claimed those ideas as my own, researched them, and obtained empirical articles to support the points that Claude gave me, and then presented the intellectual content as my own? Nobody would ever know that, because it would appear to be properly researched, it would appear to be well referenced, etc. But the intellectual content or original ideas are not necessarily my own. So I do think it can get a little bit complicated when it comes to people disguising the use of AI.
Yeah. Thank you. I think I agree with you, and that is the main problem. I think we all need to be very, very honest about the use of AI. You should, if in your minds you have a picture of what you want, but of course we want maybe to accelerate your process, something that you can actually hire maybe a research assistant to do for 6 weeks. You can actually, with AI, you can actually be able to do it quite fast. But of course, in that case, you should just be honest. Even when you hand in your submission to a journal, maybe just disclose it that yes, I did this, but because you want to protect your intellectual contribution for publication. You shouldn't submit something that you think is not your intellectual contribution. Again, we just need to be very honest about the use of AI.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Messias. Thanks for that question. There is a question in the Q&A. Are we meant to record all prompts? I think the quick answer to that one is yes. For full disclosure, you should record all your prompts and then check the journal's guidelines on how to disclose them in the paper itself. Yeah. So I think thank you, Messias, for that very, very helpful guidelines on accountable use of AI. Our next presenter is Kusi Bowie. She is Emeritus Professor at the Center for Postgraduate Studies at Rhodes University. Professor Extraordinaire at Stellenbosch University, commissioning editor for the journal Higher Education, and also associate editor for the South African Journal of Science. She spent many years teaching English as a foreign language in Spain, the Middle East, and the UK. She has a DPhil in linguistics from the University of the Western Cape, an MA in applied language studies from the University of Reading, and an MA in English language and literature from the University of St. Andrews, and also a postgraduate certificate in education from the University of Wales. She really has been around the world. Her research interests are in academic literacy, teaching and learning in higher education, critical realism, social realism, and academic development and educational development. And she is going to show us how to turn your thesis into a journal article. So Chrissy, welcome, and thank you for being with us today. And we look forward to learning more about how to turn a thesis into a journal article.
Thank you, Linda, for that very generous introduction. So, yes, good morning, everybody. I'm actually not in South Africa at the moment. I'm in England en route to a conference. So I hope that nothing goes wrong in this. I have a PowerPoint and I'm going to share it now. There you go. Let me just put it onto the slideshow. Okay. So I think that as an editor, I spot many articles.
Sorry,
which,
Chrissy?
yeah.
Sorry, I'm not sure if you're sharing the correct presentation with us.
Really? On my screen, I've got from thesis to journal article.
No, we're seeing the blank template.
Let me go back then. Sorry about this. It hasn't stopped sharing either, has it?
It stopped sharing for us.
No. Let me just see. Right. I now don't have the share on my Zoom. Am I a co-host to be able to share?
Yes, you should be.
Oh, okay. It's just come up. Right.
Sometimes Zoom hides things and puts them in different places from where they were last time.
Is that okay? Can you see it now?
Yes.
Oh, hooray. Okay. Right.
Perfect.
So, yeah, when as an editor, I often get an article and I can spot immediately it's come from a thesis. So it's not a problem that your article comes from a thesis. Obviously, everybody wants you to publish from your thesis, but there are a number of problems associated with doing that. And I think what I see is the articles that I can spot immediately, oh, this is a thesis, they haven't crafted the article sufficiently to meet the demands of a journal. So that's what I want to talk about today. So, okay, I'm going to talk about a number of biggest mistakes, what I think are the biggest mistakes you can make when you try to write from your thesis, publish from your thesis. And the first one is thinking that a journal article is a summary of your thesis. It's not. When you write an article which is a summary of your thesis, the article lacks focus. It's like all you've done is condensed the thesis, and you've often just copy and pasted chunks from the thesis into an article. So, big thing to remember, I'm not writing a summary of my thesis. Rather, what you need to do is think about the entire thesis and identify what I've called points of interest. And certainly not only your findings. Your findings are not the only points of interest in your thesis. They might be, but often findings can be pretty flat and yet not particularly interesting. So you have to work hard at looking and thinking about the whole thesis and identifying what others might find interesting in your work. So I'm going to suggest some points of interest, but there are more. And the first thing I think you could think about is whether your thesis is reconceptualizing a problem or a phenomenon. So generally, you find when you're doing a piece of research, you identify a problem or you identify a particular phenomenon that you want to research. Are there other ways to think about that problem or that phenomenon? And is there something in your PhD that does that? Okay. So, yeah, I'm going to talk about theory, and all research uses theory. So theory is like a pair of glasses. I'm wearing glasses today. If I take my glasses off, I can't see things very clearly. I can't read the screen of my computer. When I put my glasses on, I can see the screen of my computer. I can read perfectly. So theory is just like my glasses. You use the theory to look at a problem, to look at a phenomenon, and you see things which you might otherwise not have seen. So without my glasses, I couldn't spot a spelling mistake on the screen because I can't read. But I put the glasses on and I can see clearly every single word. The other thing a theory will allow you to do is to see links between things that might otherwise not be apparent. They allow us, a theory allows us to see the world in an abstract way, and we might not see those abstractions. So is there something about the theory which allowed you, because you're reporting on your PhD research, was there something about the theory that allowed you to reconceptualize, to see a problem or a phenomenon in a new way? And of course, one of the things that you must remember is that different knowledge fields are more or less overt about the theory that they use. So in the natural sciences, theory is often embedded in the literature review of the thesis or the introduction to an article. That's where the theory is. A lot of students don't realize that, for example. I've had science students, when I've been running workshops, tell me science has no theory. Of course it has theory. So the theory is probably less obvious in the natural sciences, but it's still there. In contrast, in the social sciences, there is often a whole section on theory. It might say theoretical framework. So remember that the different knowledge fields are more or less overt about the theory. Have you identified your theory in your thesis? What theory did you use in your thesis to look at a particular phenomenon? I did some research and I used journal articles with established academics. And my question was, where is the theory in this article? And I can remember one person I interviewed, and he was an ichthyologist, a fish science person. And it was the second paragraph. And he looked at the second paragraph, and then he took his pen and he wrote an equation on a piece of paper. And he said, there, that's the theory. I could see that the theory was in that second paragraph, the introduction to the article. I couldn't have written it as an equation. The expert could. So have you actually realized the theory that you used? Can you express it to yourself in abstract ways? And can you identify the way that theory might have allowed you to think about a problem or a phenomenon in a different way. Because in that case, that's worthy of writing about. So think about the theory. Think about, has your thesis used theory or methods in a new way? So even if you do know very, very clearly which theory you used, what have you done with that theory? And typically in the sciences, what you're doing is you're testing the theory in a new location, a new set of circumstances. And what you're trying to do is challenge or expand the theory in some way. That's what scientists do. They're trying to expand, make the theory account for more data. Have you done that? And going back, have you used the theory in a different way? Have you, that in fact might be challenging the theory, this theory orthodoxy, a conventional way to use it, but have you done something new with that theory? So there's a whole lot of thinking to be done about the way you use theory in your PhD. All academic work ultimately uses theory, as I've said. What did you do with the theory in your PhD? Is that something that you could write about? Have you used the theory to see the problem differently, the phenomenon differently, to reveal something new about the problem or the theory or the phenomenon? Have you used the theory in a new way? Have you used the theory differently? So think hard about that. And here's an example from one of my PhD students' work. My field is higher education. I supervise a lot of people who study universities. And she used a theorist, Bourdieu, a French sociologist, to look at the way students from marginalized groups were ignored in a business school. So the thesis was on the business school. And he set up the problem using success rates and other quantitative data. So he's saying, look, black students aren't doing as well as the white students. So, there's got to be a reason behind this. And it's not the usual reason of saying, oh, they're underprepared or whatever, anything like that. The next thing he did in his article was he explained Bourdieu, and he explained the concepts in Bourdieu. And then he made an argument that Bourdieu's concept of recognition, I won't explain that now, was ideal for exploring this problem that, for example, black students weren't doing so well in the business school. And what he showed was that black students weren't listened to for all sorts of reasons. They could speak, white students, middle-class white students, they could speak more authoritatively. They had more authority, more status when they were given more status when they spoke. And comments made by the black students were often missed. Nobody brought them up and said, oh, that's a really good point, tell us some more. So this concept of recognition told us a lot about what was happening in the classroom. And the article was on an argument for the theorist, Bourdieu, and for his concept to tell us a lot more about teaching and learning in higher education. Can you do something like that? My student's article is now in press, as they say. Okay, I've already covered this next slide. Have you used a new method or technique, or are you using a method or technique in a different way? I can give you an example. In my field, there's a method, it's not completely new nowadays, but it's called photo voice. And when you interview someone, you give them a camera before you interview them, and you say, in relation to whatever you're looking for, take photographs as you do whatever you're doing, and then bring those photographs to the interview. And what you then do is you lay those photographs out in a timeline and you get them to speak about the photographs. So photo voice itself in my field is a relatively new method. So you could write about how useful photo voice is as a piece of work, as a method in your field, and use your thesis as an example of that. But the focus in your thesis is on the method. Did you use a new technique in the lab? What did it allow you to do? What did it allow you to see? The focus could be on the new technique. Okay. Another point of interest. So we had the theory. You could write about the way the theory allowed you to see things, do things, and so on as a journal article. Another point of interest could be anything that arose in data collection or analysis that you didn't anticipate. So I've got I had another student, and he wanted to research a course at a historically Black university, a course that a lot of students struggle with. But he couldn't get access to the course at the historically Black university. So he ended up researching the course at a historically white university where they were happy. It was a course in law, and they were happy to give him access to the lecturer, to the students, to course guides, and so on. But because he had particularly wanted to write about access write about the course in a historically Black university, because it was the Black students who were failing this course a lot. And then he had to move to historically white university. He had to shift his argument. And he ended up writing an article about why the distinctions about historically Black universities and historically white universities, and they come from apartheid, so why they were now outdated. It's possible to make an argument on that. And in order to make that argument, he drew heavily on the concept of social class. So you do have some universities which are more prestigious than others. So if you look at the University of Cape Town, for example, University of Pretoria, the people who get access to those universities are mostly people from so-called good schools, educated middle-class homes. That's not true of rural universities. So he ended up developing this whole argument about the way historically Black, historically white was not the case. Because if you look at UCT, the majority of their students are now Black. But you look at where they came from, and you see they came from these well-educated families, and they went to better schools. So his article was all about the higher education system. It wasn't about his particular piece of research. So complete shift, his PhD, and he will publish from his PhD. He will publish other things. Ideally, he gets 3, 4, if he's lucky, publications from the PhD. But this first one was an argument about that old distinction between historically Black and historically white is now outdated. He never thought that he'd end up publishing on that, but that's what he did. Another point of interest, of course, could be interesting findings or insights. Now, I said when I first started talking that sometimes the findings are flat. They're not particularly interesting. They're what you might have expected. So what else can you find in the thesis? Or are there some findings, not all your findings, but are there some findings that are particularly interesting? So again, I'm going to use an example. My student looked at a professional development course for academic teachers, the kind of courses that universities run to get academics to learn how to teach. And she ended up arguing that the courses placed too much emphasis on participants' agency, on their ability to contribute to transformation. So the assumption is that if you get someone to do these courses, they'll then be able to improve their teaching and more students will be able to pass. However, what she showed was that the people who went to these courses, they learned stuff, but when they went back home to their department, they often couldn't implement it. Students objected. The students didn't like a new way of teaching. That was one thing. Or other members of staff in the department, when the participant in the course suggested doing something differently, maybe different forms of assessment and so on, they all said, no, we can't do that. So she showed through this research that academics don't have this freedom to implement what they learn in these courses because the structure of the university stops them. Now, that was a very interesting finding because it challenged big assumptions made in the universities themselves. So think hard about your findings and what is it that's really, really interesting about the findings. If I go back to my student who I gave him, I used his writing as an example earlier when I said he wrote about saying the distinction between historically black and historically white universities is now outdated. And that article is now in press. But if we go now to his findings, what he was able to identify is that this course that he was interested in that had a big failure rate, it drew on a different knowledge form. Most of the other courses in an LLB, a Bachelor of Laws degree, drew on a knowledge form called codified practice. Yet this course, jurisprudence, was pure theory. So that, wow, whoever thought that the courses in a law degree were this form of knowledge called codified practice. And codified practice is where you look at what's been done in society over time, and then you explain that as a set of steps, and the set of steps then become the law in practice as it is. Nobody thought of that, but he was able to do that from his research. So yeah, look hard at your findings, and what is it? Don't report all the findings, because some won't be particularly interesting, probably. But what is it that's really interesting in your findings? The same would apply to recommendations. A lot of recommendations, if you've got a thesis that does indeed offer recommendations, and remember, theses don't have to make recommendations. For me, what would be a point of recommendation would be one that goes against the grain, which is contrary to sort of common sense. That would be an interesting thing to write about. Whoever would have thought, without my research, that I would be making this recommendation. So yeah, think hard about your findings and your recommendations, and what is it that's really interesting, that's unexpected, and that would be something that other people would be interested in reading about. So identifying these points of interest in your thesis requires hard work on your part. It's not just reporting on the lot. It's really engaging with the thesis and asking yourself, what might other people find interesting? And what can I argue? How can I argue that this is interesting? The whole thesis is unlikely to be interesting on every page. I've never seen one like that, and I've examined a lot and I've supervised a lot. So you have to think really, really hard about what other people might find interesting, and that could be the focus of your journal article. So another thing you can do is ask your supervisor. Experienced supervisors will often identify things you didn't even consider writing about. They know the field, they know your work. That's a big advantage. So have a conversation with your supervisor. I know when I supervise, and often during the analysis phase, or indeed any phase, you can say to, I would say to the student, you realize, don't you, there's a journal article in this. So make a note of that. You can write on this later. So the supervisors often have this experience which will allow them to see what you could write on that you don't have. So talk to supervisors, talk to other people in the field, and if you do for yourself identify a point of interest, ask them, do you think I could write on this, and get their opinion? I think that's a really good thing to do. Whatever you choose to focus on in the article, you need to build an argument leading up to it. So that's hard work. So you're asking yourself, why? Why is this, whatever I'm writing about, why is this interesting? So you have to build that argument, and that argument is the greatest part of your journal article, and then you bring in whatever you found about the point of interest. So that argument is critical to the success of your journal article. All this means, of course, that you can't count on copying and pasting from the thesis itself. In fact, copying and pasting from the thesis itself is often a thing that goes against getting your article published. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. So as a first strategy, I would not copy and paste. What I would do is sit down and write afresh. So you've got this point of interest, and remember, what you're going to do is begin your article by making the argument for why this particular focus in your article is important or is interesting. And that would mean writing afresh. So be suspicious if you find yourself scrolling through your thesis and trying to find a paragraph that you can paste. That won't necessarily serve you well. And I'll give you more reasons for that in a minute. Be prepared to write your journal article from the beginning, as though you don't have a thesis. Okay. The biggest mistake number 2, so the first one, biggest mistake number 1, was thinking of an article as a summary of your thesis. The second mistake is thinking that the readers of an article are the same as the readers of your thesis, because they're not. The readers of your thesis, your examiners, and very few people will actually read your thesis. The other students might look for your thesis, they might find it through a literature search, but they'll then be postgraduate students with an interest in your topic. So the other people who will read your thesis, obviously, are your examiners. And the readers of your thesis are therefore likely to be more expert in the field or experts in your methodology or in your techniques and so on. So if I'm nominating examiners of my students' theses, I'll always try to find someone who's an expert in either the theory or the particular kind of methodological approach used, and I'll try to find experts in the field. So if I think of the examiners I nominated for the student who used Bourdieu to look at business schools, I wanted experts in Bourdieu, and I wanted people who knew about business schools, the so-called executive business schools education. They're unlikely to come together. You're unlikely to get three people who have all those interests. So you get this spread in the examiners, but you'll still have experts nominated. If you think about a journal, the readers of your article in a journal are unlikely to have the same level of expertise. Some of them might. Again, it depends on the nature of the journal. But if it's a more generalist journal, then they're very, very unlikely to have the same level of expertise. So one question you could ask is, are the readers of the journal likely to be familiar with the theory that I used? And this then has implications for the extent to which you have to explain your theory. Don't assume everybody knows the theory. And remember too, that theories are always associated with particular language, or they use language in specialized ways. So one of the theories I use, critical realism, it uses the term emerge or emergence in a very specialized way. And you have to explain what that word means in relation to this particular theory, because it's not just come into view, it's got this very specialized meaning. So you have to be careful about the way you use terminology and the extent to which you need to explain it. So think carefully about the level to which readers of the article will be familiar with the language of the theory. And if they're unlikely to be familiar with the language of theory, you have to explain it before you can use it in your article. Another mistake, I've called it biggest mistake number 3, is not thinking hard enough about the journal you want to send your article to. So if, for example, the South African Journal of Science, who are the readers of that journal? Now, in that title, South African Journal of Science, the term science is understood very broadly, and it can encompass the social sciences as well as the natural sciences. Okay, so my field of interest is the social sciences. I do work on higher education, on universities, on teaching and learning in universities. So if I want to publish in the South African Journal of Sciences, a lot of the people who read the journal and who might be interested in my article will just be academics in, say, botany or computer science. So I have to think of the way I can make my article interesting to them. And one of the ways I might do that is embed it in a problem they might experience as academic teachers, or debates about the higher education system. So I might begin by embedding what I have to say, locating what I have to say in these broader issues. And so what I'm doing is I'm thinking hard about what it is about my point of interest, my focus, that will appeal to these people who don't work in my field at all. And my question to myself is, how can I grab their interest? How can I make them, first of all, want to read my article and then carry on reading it once they've started? And that might mean not being too specialized or too expert in the way I write. On the other hand, if I'm writing for another journal that is specifically focused on higher education, and which therefore draws researchers. The majority of its researchers will be people who are researching the universities or teaching and learning in the universities, then I can be more expert. I can explain less. I can assume that they will have more knowledge about what I'm writing about than if I'm writing for another journal. So what you need to do is to check the aims and scope section of the journal. And you find that on the web page. You'll find it in a hard copy of the journal. And it will tell you who the intended audience is. The other thing you can do is check contents lists, and see, how specialized, how expert are the texts, and read for other articles looking for fitness between what you're wanting to write about and what's been written about in the past. So the big question here, I think, is how general or how specific the journal is, and therefore how will what you're sharing fit with that journal. I've said this already, and that is, please consider writing the article afresh rather than trying to adapt the text of your thesis. You often save time by writing afresh. Literally, a new file on your computer and you start writing, then fiddling with text that you've cut from your thesis, and now you're trying to change that text into your journal article. And remember that the thesis and the article are serving very different purposes. When you submit your thesis for examination, imagine you're knocking on the door of a house, or you're knocking on the door of the university. And what you're doing as you submit your thesis, you're saying, here, I'm like you. I'm one of you. I belong in this house of doctors, and here's my thesis to prove it. So in your thesis, you're trying to prove that you should be recognized as a researcher. You should be given the title doctor because you are like the other doctors. So think about the submission as a thesis as a way of gaining recognition as a researcher. And that recognition comes in the title doctor. Once you've got the PhD, you've got the title doctor, you are recognized. So it's not like you're needing to prove anything in the same way. So your article is written to demonstrate that expertise. You're in that inner circle of doctors, professors. You're there. Even though you're not a professor, you're in that highest rank of the you've got the researcher category. You've made it. So now your job is to demonstrate your expertise. And this will impact on the voice or the persona you adopt as you write. So in the thesis, you're trying to demonstrate that you're worthy of the title doctor. Once you're writing an article, you've got the title doctor, you've been recognized as worthy of carrying that doctor. So therefore, you can be more authoritative. You can assume more status as you write the article. So what people in my field call the voice, the persona, the person of the writer is different for a thesis and the article. And even if you haven't yet got the title, you're writing as a student, you're still going to have to adopt this different voice. As you write, and this is a piece of general advice for writing, ask yourself continuously, if I say this, what will my readers say? So it's like you're having a conversation where you're anticipating what your readers will say. Is there any way my readers could object to what I'm writing? Is there any way my readers could say, I don't understand what you're talking about? Or is there any way where your readers would say, yes, 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 of course, I know that. And of course, and they could elaborate on what you say. So what you need to have is this voice of your reader in your head and try to anticipate their objections because there's a contrary position, a contrary view, or whether they could expand on what you say, and therefore you need to expand on what you've written, or where it's simply not clear to them. Anticipate those things they might say by constantly having this question, if I say this, what will my readers say? And then, and this is the second bullet, be prepared to draft and redraft and even delete and start again. It's so tempting to hold on to what you've already written because it's hard to write. And it seems terrible not to use what you've already written. But actually, it can benefit you from writing anew and not trying to fiddle to fix up what you've already written. Okay? One of the things that we know from research is that writing is learning. It's not that you learn first and then you write that learning down, but as you write, you learn. And that's because the act of writing, of typing or writing with a pen, it slows down your thinking, and then it gives you time to question what you're writing. Okay, so if you just cut and paste from your thesis and say, there, that's okay, that's done, you're not giving yourself the opportunity to question what you've already been written in the light of the fact, for example, that you're writing for a different purpose. You're writing now to demonstrate your expertise or for a different audience. So be prepared to start again and don't succumb to that it's tempting to that just cutting and pasting and trying to piece the cutting and pasting again. I don't think it will serve you well. But what will serve you well, starting afresh with this advice that you're writing for a different kind of audience, you're writing for a different purpose to demonstrate your expertise and so on, and that you've identified this new focus, then you're better off starting anew. Okay, that's the end of what I have to say, but we have time for questions. So I hope that's prompted some thought, and I'm very happy to answer questions. Linda, over to you.
Thank you very much, Christy. Sorry, we're just getting our mics coordinated in the office here. But thanks very much for that presentation. I think that outlines everything anyone needs to know very well. Are there any questions for Christy on writing an article from your thesis? Yes, please unmute and ask your question. Finet, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Finet.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me, please?
We can.
Yeah, thank you, Chrissy. Thank you so much for your insightful presentation. My name is Fenet, and I'm a climate change expert from Jammu University, Ethiopia. My research focuses on climate change adaptation, variability, vulnerability, and resilience. Given that focus, I have a critical question regarding the theory required in high impact publishing. We often find that research coming out of Africa, which is deeply grounded in localized empirical data on vulnerability and resilience, is dismissed by editors as they are merely descriptive or lacking theoretical rigor when it doesn't align with the Western theoretical frameworks. For example, in my field, we see community-led adaptation strategies based on different indigenous water sharing and social cohesion. So when researchers document these effective real-world models, they are often rejected because the data doesn't fit into Western-centric frameworks like rational choice theory.
Yeah.
So which assumes individual profit maximization rather than communal resilience, like that in Africa. Yeah. So my question is, Chrissy, to what extent do you think our current publishing criteria for theory are inherently biased towards these northern paradigms? And as an editor, how do you actively work to ensure that African-led, practice-based or indigenous knowledge-based research is not unfairly penalized for not fitting into those specific traditional theory boxes? Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, so forget where the theory originates from. Think about the kind of theory that we use at universities as academic researchers is usually called powerful knowledge. Why is it powerful? Well, it's powerful because it has the capacity to explain a phenomenon anywhere in the world, now and into the future. That's one reason why it's powerful. So if you think about somebody might say who lives on the east coast of South Africa, they might say it always rains in summer. Now that's true. At the moment, the rain tends to come in summer on the east coast of South Africa. It's not true for the west coast. On the west coast, the rain comes in the winter, generally. Now, that kind of knowledge, it always rains in summer, it's localized, it comes from experience. However, the more powerful knowledge is the rain cycle, and everybody learns the rain cycle in school. You know that the sun shines on the ocean, the water in the ocean warms, it then evaporates, rises, forms clouds, the wind blows the clouds in over the land. As they come over the land, the temperature cools, and then the water condenses, falls on the ground, runs into the rivers, and back into the ocean. Okay, that theory is abstract. Condensation, you can't see. Evaporation, you can't see. That theory is powerful because it will explain rainfall in South Africa, in the Amazon basin, wherever. It's a powerful way of looking at the world. Now let's get to indigenous knowledge and what you've just said. A lot of indigenous knowledge currently exists as sets of practices. So people will say, in my culture, we do this, right? And sadly, often researchers, particularly those from the global north, are looking for commercial benefit in practice. And then they will try to explain the practice, what people do, using Western theory. But what we need to do as indigenous, people using indigenous knowledge, is to go beneath the practice and to say, what's the theory behind what people do? And you've already told me what that theory is, some of that theory. And part of the theory is you mentioned the word social connectivity, and you also said what's often behind indigenous practice is an understanding of the world as a connected place. Post-humanism, it's not the human who is privileged, it's that we have a relationship to the whole world, everything that comprises the world, and it's that underlies what people do. So if I were writing an article that wanted to use indigenous knowledge, I begin by arguing for the validity of a different knowledge system by saying it's not a practice level, there's something underpinning it. Practices come from somewhere. The things people do come from a set of beliefs about the world. So what are those beliefs? And then you bring those up and you have to explain that and therefore argue that indigenous knowledge has the same status as knowledge produced in the global north. Knowledge from the global north is sometimes called knowledge, powerful knowledge, because it's produced, it's the global north that's powerful. So you, Fene, would have to argue for the power of the indigenous knowledge, but it's not at the level of practice. You have to begin by saying, these practices, which I'm going to report on, I'm going to use in my article, they come from a completely different understanding of the world. And that's where I'd begin that article. And you're arguing as you do that for an equal status for indigenous knowledges and global north knowledges as equal in terms of their power to explain the world about us. So the power of indigenous knowledge comes from this understanding of the world as, post-human, this connectedness and so on. So that's the way I'd write that article. And if, as an editor, that's what I'd be looking for. I'm looking for not just we do this and what we do is useful. I'm looking for what lies beneath what we do. Is there some sort of argument there? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Danae, for that question. I think I don't see any other hands up, so thanks very much, Chrissy, and we will share these slides with everyone afterwards for reference and to come back and refer back when and if you reach that stage that you are going to write a journal article.
Well, I hope you see some of those articles in the South African Journal of Science.
Yes. And
Okay.
please let us know when you've written your article from your thesis. We are going to have a short break. I know we had to skip the earlier break, so make it just under 10 minutes. If we could please come back at 25 minutes past 12, just to continue with the program. And if you have any other questions, you're welcome to pop them in the Q&A and we can address them in the next session. Thank you very much, Chrissy, and see you all back at 25 past.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had enough time to do what you needed to do for us to continue. The next session is, as according to the program, an open session. So we did ask you all to vote for what topics you would like us to talk about in this session. And according to the votes, you wanted us to talk about how to choose a journal and how to respond to reviewers' comments. So we're going to briefly present on those. And then the rest of the session is for your questions or any other topics you'd like us to address. So please do put your questions in the Q&A or suggested themes in the chat even. And I'm going to hand over to Leslie Swartz, who is our editor-in-chief, for those who may not know him. And he's going to be facilitating this session.
Hi, everyone. I'm just looking to share the right screen. Sorry, I'm struggling a bit here. Okay, can you see my screen, Linda?
Yes.
Okay. It's funny, I didn't know I was responding to the first one about choosing a journal, but I have plenty of slides on that, but I will talk to that afterwards. I haven't prepared slides for that, but I'm very happy to talk about that.
Leslie, don't worry.
No, that's what I thought, but so I will talk about responding to peer review, and then I'll hand over to Linda, who will talk about choosing a journal. I feel rather relieved about that, but I'm happy to talk about that as well. Thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to all the people who are attending, and please do, we're not going to have time for many questions at the end. We do have our monthly journal forums. Please join up for that so that you can put questions there as well. Okay, so we're going to talk about responding to reviewer feedback. There are three outcomes when you submit to a journal, which in order of prevalence, how commonly they happen. The first is outright reject. So the journal says, no, thank you, we don't want your article. Then the next common is revise and resubmit. And the least common, it almost happens never, is when the journal says, we don't want any changes, we're going to accept your article as it is. Now, generally speaking, a lot of people waste a lot of time on this. Generally speaking, if a journal rejects your article, they're not going to change their mind. We have very high rejection rates. The rejection rate of our journal is over 90%. Generally speaking, unless the journal has made some huge mistake, they're not going to overturn that. And what you should do is the minute you get a reject, you should be thinking you should send your paper to another journal. Now, Linda's going to be talking more about choosing a journal. Chrissy has spoken about it. One of the things to do the first time you submit something to a journal, you've targeted journal X, you should actually have in your mind the most likely response is it's going to be rejected. What is the second journal that I'm going to send to, so that when you get a reject, you can act on that. But we're talking here about responding to peer review, which was what the question was about. So we're focusing here on revise and resubmit. One of the things that is most upsetting to me as a journal editor is that we ask people to revise and resubmit, and a good proportion of people, we never hear from them again. And it's really sad, because we would not ask people to revise and resubmit unless we wanted to see the article again. So always revise and resubmit. even if the feedback you get feels hurtful, or you feel cross about the feedback, or you feel humiliated about the feedback, I'm afraid that is kind of part of the problem, or part of the ground that we stand on. But always, if you any revise and resubmit, however negative it seems to you, the door is a little bit open that you might be accepted later. There's no guarantee that you will, but always revise and resubmit. Okay. So yes, I mean, as I've mentioned, revise and resubmit is it can be upsetting. When you get feedback, just remember it's peer review. So one of the questions that we had in the chat earlier today was why do journals take so long? It's because we're looking for peer reviewers. It's people just like you and just like me. So it's not a review by someone on high, by it depends what your theology is, but it's not a review by God. It's also not a comment on who you are. The peer reviewers generally don't know who you are and they don't care who you are. So it's not about you. But I promise you, every single person gets rejected. People think about me because I'm a journal editor and I've published a lot of articles that I never get rejected. I got a very big rejection last week. I get them all the time. It's horrible to be rejected. So I always say you can hide under a rock, but only for a week. You've got to develop a thicker skin. And particularly if you are a single author, don't keep it to yourself. It really helps certainly for me, when I say, oh, I got this terrible feedback and I feel so humiliated and ashamed. And whoever you're talking to, if they're an experienced academic, they will tell you they've had similar feedback themselves. So tell somebody, share it, and commit to helping one another when dealing with reviews. But also remember, most reviewers, not all, but most, are really trying their best. And this is just for some kind of fun. You'll recognize these from the internet. The person who has power over you when you are submitting is the reviewer. So you may often feel, I submitted this rather nice manuscript, and after peer review and revision, actually, I had to change things. I mean, never change things so that you feel that the article is no longer yours. But I've often actually eventually had things accepted that I think are not quite as good as, it's not quite the way that I wanted it in the beginning. But I don't have the power. It's the reviewers and the editor who have the power. So I have to try and fit into what the editors and the reviewers want. I'm not going to destroy what I've done, but I have to fit into what they want. So how do we do it? The best thing to do is to take action. And how do we do this? Well, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So you're going to get feedback. It might be a lot of feedback. One of the ironies of getting feedback from journals is, generally speaking, the more feedback you get, even though it feels like pages and pages and pages of people being rude to you, the more helpful it is, because your reviewers are actually taking the time to give you detailed feedback that you can respond to. It's very difficult, in fact, to respond to a very small piece of feedback, especially where a reviewer says, the theory is not good enough. That tells me nothing. It doesn't tell me how I'm going to help. So a good reviewer will give me a lot of information. Take it bit by bit. You have to show that you've responded to each and every comment. It is pointless to start arguing with your reviewers. Yes, they will misunderstand you, and we all know that the reason reviewers misunderstand us is they cannot see how brilliant we are. But what you have to ask for yourself is, how have I put things, if they really misunderstand what you're doing, what have I done that has helped them to misunderstand me? Okay, is there another way I could have put things that would have helped them to understand me better? So always try and understand what reviewers say, however hurtful they must be. And for those of you familiar with Shakespeare's play Hamlet, when Hamlet is trying to humor Polonius, and they're looking at the clouds, or Polonius is trying to humor Hamlet, they're looking at the clouds, and Hamlet says, "Do you think the cloud looks like a camel?" And Polonius says, "Yes, very like a camel." And I think it's like an extremely like it. You've got to be a bit like that with your reviewers. You've got to humor your reviewers, show that you take them seriously. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with absolutely everything they say, but always try and understand where they come from. Okay. One of the difficulties that we have, and I've just dealt with one, not with this journal, but with another journal that I edit, is sometimes reviewers are extremely rude. And then your temptation as an author is also to be rude. We don't want reviewers to be rude, and we don't want authors to be rude. So please be polite. Say thank you if you agree with what a reviewer says. Give compliments if you think the review is good. Be very clear. Reviewers are going to contradict each other. So explain to the editor why you've gone with, in this particular case, why you've gone with reviewer A as opposed to reviewer B, for example. If a reviewer is completely wrong, first try and understand and indicate that you're trying to understand where they come from, and then be absolutely clear why you can't do what they say. If you feel that they're wrong. The other thing that's really important is reviewers will often say, "You haven't put such and such in your paper," and actually you have. Don't fight. You just, in response to that, you say, "You will now find it on page 25. The fact that it was already there on page 25 doesn't matter. Reviewers generally do this work in addition to all their other work, and they will make mistakes. Journals are looking for reasons to reject you. So if you start complaining and insulting reviewers, it's not a good thing. Try and be empathic. And of course, you yourself, the minute you publish, you become a reviewer. So you must try and be constructive and helpful next time. So I'm going to give you an example of what I do. This is my last slide, but I'm really happy to take discussion after Linda's done her presentation. Don't do it in all of these colors, but what I find really helpful, both as an author and as a reviewer, but also as an editor, is what you want to show the reviewers and the editors that you have responded to absolutely every single thing that they have said. So what I do is I make a table, and on the left-hand side, there are the reviewer comments and the editor comments copied from the letter that you get from the journal, and then your responses. So, and you will make a table so that you will have different ideas, even if they're in the same sentence, in different boxes. And these are real examples here. This is an interesting paper on an important topic. That's one idea. What's my response to the reviewer? Thank you. But it fails to articulate its premises. Thank you for this helpful comment. This is how we've changed it. We've made our position more explicit. You'll find this and that. This was a real one that I got, which really made me laugh. I was shocked that the brilliant work of Swartz 2017 was not cited. I've also had comments from reviewers saying, "I've never heard of Swartz," and that's me. They say, "We apologize and we agree with the author. We've now referenced Swartz 2017, and we've also referenced another thing that Swartz wrote." Then you get a comment like, "I would have liked to have seen more discussion of something," and you say, "Thank you." And you say, "But the other reviewers," here are responses below, "suggested we don't mention this. What we've decided to do is to follow reviewer B on this because we have space limitations." But here, and this is really important, it's the last thing I'm going to say. If you ever don't do anything that a reviewer wants, you say, "We haven't done it because," and in this case, the reason that we haven't done it is we're following the other reviewer. You've got two reasons and we don't have space for it. But then it's always a good idea to say, "We're happy to reconsider this should reviewer A believe that this would be best for the article." And the reason I say that is, actually, if they do insist, you can change it. But generally speaking, they necessarily want you to do exactly what they say, but they want you to know that you've heard them and that you've listened to them. Never in my life, when I have offered, when I've said we'd be happy to do this, to reconsider, have they come back to me and said, yes, you must change, because I've given reasons, I've said I've considered it, I've said I'll discuss this, and generally reviewers are very happy with it. So that's a very quick guide. Just be polite, go point by point, don't fight, and that I think is both good for you. It's what the reviewers want, it's what the editors want, and it increases your chances of being accepted the next time round. Thanks, everybody, and thank you, Linda.
Thanks very much, Leslie, I know you've had lots of experience as both author, reviewer, and editor, and I think it's really helpful advice. Thank you. Are there any questions for Leslie? Lots of claps, Leslie, but no questions.
I live for a clap. I'd like, it's what we all want from our reviewers, is a clap.
Okay, it doesn't look like there's any questions. If you have any questions, you're welcome to pop them in the Q&A. Thanks, Leslie. Now we counterintuitively starting with how to choose, or ending with something we should start with, which is how to choose a journal, which is something you should certainly think about early on in your study, and not after you've written the paper. When some of us do it, but it's always good to have a plan in mind and to properly prepare your manuscript according to the journal you want to submit to, or as Leslie says, have a backup journal and hopefully not have to change too much between them. So why is it important to choose the right journal? Well, once you've done your study, analyzed your results, and you want to write your paper, or you've started writing your paper, it's important to give enough time and thought to where to choose a journal. As Chrissy mentioned earlier, it's really who do you want to target as your readers, and who you want to read your papers is a big part of which journal you choose to submit to. And while you're thinking about this, you need to ask yourself, why are you publishing your research? Because you want to add to the knowledge and literature on your subject. You want to be able to contribute to the discussion or debates in your field, and you want to share your findings with those whom are relevant. So it may be peers in your subject field, but it might also be policymakers or practitioners and even the public. So how do you share your findings with all these different groups of or target audiences? You need to think about a dissemination plan early on in your research plan. Your dissemination plan can include scholarly formats like journal articles, preprints, book chapters, conference presentations, but also non-scholarly formats like newsletter contributions or media reports or social media posts, blog posts or podcasts, so that you can reach all the target audiences that you feel you want to share your findings with. Today we're going to be talking about a journal article, and what you need to consider when choosing the right journal is your manuscript a good fit for the journal? You need to look at what are the journal's aims and scope, as Leslie mentioned and Chrissy mentioned. You need to look at what is the journal's audience or readership, what article types does that journal publish, and are there any restrictions on length of the article type? Sometimes a big foot's just not going to fit in a small shoe. Journal scope, well, different journals have different purposes and therefore different audiences. As we've discussed, there are specialist journals for researchers in that field, multidisciplinary journals for a broad range of researchers, like the South African Journal of Science. There are journals for practicing professionals, like doctors and teachers. There are review journals that publish review articles, methods journals that publish methods papers. And to decide on what scope or what journal you want according to scope, you need to ask, what is the purpose or message of your manuscript? Are you aiming to change policy and therefore want to target policy makers? Are you wanting to guide professional practice and therefore you want to target doctors or teachers? Are you reporting on a new method? And it's important to know the purpose of your manuscript when you're considering what journal to submit to. You also want to look at the journal's readership. Is the journal's readership global, regional, or local in terms of geographical scope? Is it a generalist or specialist journal? But even beyond that, you have theology journals, and then you have theology journals that will be specific, for example, to the Old Testament. You will have medicine journals or medical journals that may be very specific to oncology, but then even neuro-oncology as a higher specialty, for example. So you want to choose a journal that has the scope and the audience appropriate for the topic of your paper and for your target audience, the purpose of why you are writing and sharing your findings. Many desk rejections, as Leslie has said, is not because there's a flaw in the manuscript, but because your manuscript did not fit within the scope of the journal you targeted. You may also need to consider that the most appropriate journal for your paper is on something that's quite specific. For example, challenges of teachers in rural Limpopo may be a local journal with a narrower target audience or more selective target audience, rather than an international journal that will have a broad readership but may not be interested in your particular topic with its regional scope. When looking at journals or when considering journals, look also at the article types published by that journal and check if it matches with the purpose or message and audience that you want to aim for with your paper. And if the journal that you're looking at is appropriate, it should have an article type that will be applicable to your paper. For example, there are case studies or clinical trials that may be more specific to medical journals, and most journals will have original research articles or review article options. So you've looked at whether your paper is a good fit for the journal. Now you need to consider if the journal is a good fit for your paper. And you want to look at things like, what is the journal's reputation in your field? What is its impact? What is its reach and distribution? Is it indexed in reputable indexes? Are there metrics available that show how widely it's read? Are the members of its editorial board known and respected in your field? How often does it publish, and what are the timelines? If time is a priority for you, what is its acceptance rate? Is the journal paywalled, or is it open access? Or is there a hybrid option? If so, are there waivers, or does your institution have agreements that may fund those article processing charges? If you've written a preprint of your article, is the journal allowing submission of preprints? What's its policy on that? What is the peer review model it uses? There are single, double, and triple anonymous models, or open peer review, or post peer review. Does that matter to you? Do you want a particular model? And also look at what are the copyright policies for that publisher. Will you be handing over the copyright, or will you be able to retain the copyright? And if you do hand over the copyright, what allowances will you as the author have to your own work? It's very important that you not sign over or sign agreements without understanding what license you are giving to the publisher, because they are irrevocable. So you cannot change your mind afterwards once you because you didn't understand which license you were agreeing to. And then you may also want to ask, what does the the publisher or the journal do to market your article after publication. And if there's any information that you cannot find on the website of the journal and you have looked, then it's a good idea just to email the editor to ask any other questions before you decide finally which journal to choose. So now that you know what to look for, where do you start? We'll always start with what you know. So if you want to target your peers, consider the journals that you normally read and which journals you've cited, particularly which journals you've cited in the study that you want to publish. There are also databases, trusted databases and directories that you can search for journals, Web of Science, Scopus, also open access ones like the Directory of Open Access Journals in Scielo, South Africa for open access South African journals. And then there are tools, journal suggested tools such as Jane, where you input your abstract and then it does suggest which journals may be applicable. And also publisher-specific ones if you have a particular publisher in mind. Double check that the journal you are submitting or have chosen is reputable. Did you find it on a trusted index? And also do a checklist. The Think, Check, Submit tool helps you to double check whether a particular journal or publisher could possibly be predatory or is a legitimate choice. There are, unfortunately, increasingly predatory practices when publishing articles. Before you submit or really do carefully consider any flattering invitations you may have, or journals that advertise very fast turnaround times where there are unclear or no information on publication fees and the peer review process. Always double check those using a tool like Think, Check, Submit, and don't be caught unawares by such practices. Lastly, you want to consider the reuse policies of whichever journal you've chosen to make sure that it does allow the self-archiving or dissemination options that you have determined from your dissemination plan. And the JISC Open Policy Finder is a useful tool to give you information on what self-archiving options are allowed by particular journals. And you can also verify this information with the journal so that you're not breaking any policies with how you share your article after publication. So good luck and choose well, and hopefully making the right choice makes it a much easier and pleasanter process. Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay.
Are you getting the claps, Linda?
Not seeing any hands up. Okay, no questions on that. Hopefully everything was clear. We do probably have time for one or two quick general questions if anyone has something they've been burning to ask this entire time. Then you have a few minutes to get your question out. No, we've had a very quiet audience. Hopefully that means everything has been clear and concise, and or you're all just very shy, I'm not sure. Okay. Well, it seems like there are no further questions, so we can finish a couple minutes early, which I'm sure no one will complain about. So I just want to, oh, sorry. Ames has a question? Please
Yes,
go ahead.
please. Thanks. Thank you for this wonderful session that you've had today. I'm not too sure whether I should ask this question here, but seeing that we've got journal editors as well, I'm going to ask it anyways. I am really struggling in terms of getting suitable reviewers for articles, and I hear this from my colleagues as well. And it's become worse ever since the funding issues, where researchers are now scrambling to do other jobs because of problems with funding. I know it's not advisable, but at times I'm very tempted to ask authors to send me a list of about 6 to 8 suitable reviewers, and to preserve some sort of anonymity. I would choose the reviewers at random. Just need your thoughts on that, and also whether it would be okay for us when accepting the paper for peer review. Could we ask for reviewers, for a list of reviewers right at that stage? Thanks. Over.
Thanks, Ames. I think everyone in our team was nodding their heads when you were asking the question. I'm not sure, Leslie, if you want to offer some advice.
I mean, thank you so much. I mean, I think it's very helpful actually that the people on this webinar actually hear this, because actually the very first question this morning was, why do journals take so long? And Ames, you and I both know why we take so long. We're running around faster and faster, trying to get reviewers. And I mean, I answered early on. I mean, both, I edit this journal, edit another journal. Sometimes we'll ask more than 30 people to try and get 2 reviews. It's a huge problem. So we do ask authors, and many journals do ask authors to suggest reviewers. It's complicated because we still have to check, is there a conflict of interest? And people, you could get into a thing where somebody's asking their a member of their family who actually has no subject knowledge and so on. But I don't think we have much of a choice. In the absolute ideal world, we wouldn't want authors to suggest reviewers. But the reality is, as you faced and we face, and every journal that I know faces, it's very difficult to get reviewers. And one of the methods is to actually ask the authors themselves. But the journals themselves, as you've said, a good journal will still check, does that person have subject expertise? Is there a conflict of interest before approaching these? But yes, I think we have to do it. I mean, the publicationethics.org, the Committee on Publication Ethics, which you're probably, which I'm sure you're familiar with, is not terribly keen on it because of the potential problems of conflict of interest. And but we have to do it. I always make a joke and say, I mean, one of the best things that a journal editor can know is to know something terribly embarrassing about a lot of scientists, so that you can threaten that you're going to tell the world about some embarrassing thing that they did if they don't give you a review. It's such a huge problem, and it's important, I think, for particularly junior scholars, many of whom are on this call, to understand that time that you are sitting and waiting, the journal is running around trying to get reviews. It's the most difficult thing in 30 years of journal editing for myself, and it's got much worse. Thanks, Linda.
Thanks. I think, yeah, very important question. for highlighting the biggest challenge all journals are facing at the moment. So please, everybody out there who's a potential reviewer or a reviewer, please consider mentorship so we can get some more peer reviewers in the system as well, because that is the process depends on peer review. So we've come to the end of a very diverse and insightful workshop. So thank you again to all of our speakers for their presentations, and for all the participants for joining us and listening, and to my colleagues for their assistance behind the scenes, Nadia, Pumlani, and Louise. And we will be sharing the slides, and I'm going to ask Nadia if she can please share a feedback form just so you can let us know where we can perhaps improve or what you enjoyed about the workshop the most. And it leaves me to wish you all a happy weekend, and Leslie, safe travels. And thank you once again for joining us.